Hello, my friends. Welcome. My name is Joe. This is the Joe Martino Show. And today we're going to talk about some signs that you may be dealing with someone who is toxic. This is a term that gets thrown around a lot, and I want to talk about it today on some things that we can look out for. Let's kick it off. This is the Joe Martino Show.
You're listening to The Joe Martino Show, a podcast dealing with all things emotional, relational, and human nature. Joe is a licensed counselor in the state of Michigan, specializing in relationship therapy. He is also the author of the book, The Emotionally Secure Couple. All advice offered in this episode is offered for entertainment and educational purposes only. Enjoy the show.
All right, welcome back. Or maybe welcome if this is your first time. I don't know if you've been listening to me before or if this is your first time. Either way, welcome. I hope that your end of year preparations are going well. It's hard to believe we're at the end of the year already, isn't it? I want to talk today about something that gets talked about a lot in our circles. You hear about it a lot. You'll see a lot of social media posts about it. And it's this idea of what is a toxic person. One of the things that I realize is there's a lot of terms. Like we're going to talk about gaslighting today because I hear a lot of people say, oh, I'm just being gaslit. And I'm thinking, no, that isn't actually gaslighting. And then there are other times where I think, man, that poor person's really being gaslit right now. And certainly I'm probably exposed to these things at a higher rate than the average person, given my career, given the fact that I work in counseling. I sit with people regularly, and we talk through these things. We're at the end of the year. One of the things that's most interesting to me is I do a lot of couples therapy, and a lot of couples at the end of the year, one of them will be pushing hard for to terminate or graduate. I was trying not to use the word termination. It's the clinical term, but people outside the field sometimes like, wow, that's kind of a harsh word. But so that, they push hard for termination, and invariably the other person's like, yeah, but we're not done. And a lot of times that is because the person that is pushing for termination is actually very toxic. And what I mean by that is one of the first things that you will notice in a person who's actually toxic is they're not willing to change. They play the victim in the role, right? And I have this a lot, like a lot of times, I have it, I'd say at least once a week in my room, probably 2 or 3 times a week, where someone is doing something that is destructive to the marriage. They're doing something that is destructive to the other person. And they want to focus on how the other person responded to them and how that response to their wrong behavior wasn't right. They play the victim in that. And at the end of the year, we run out of our deductibles. And so it's a good reason to kind of, okay, I don't need to go to therapy anymore. Because one of the things, if you're going to go to therapy and you're going to get better, there's going to be parts of you that are exposed that typically we try to keep hidden. That's just how good therapy works. Which does bring up one of the regular characteristics of an unhealthy, toxic person, and that is they try to be very controlled. They try to be very secretive. And here's the thing. None of us want to be that person where you're talking and you're like, hey, how are you? And you really are just kind of moving through your day. And all of a sudden you've just heard their whole life story. You've heard about the wart growing on their third toe. You've heard about the infection that it grows in their nether regions. And there's too much there. You don't want to hear about that. Or you hear about how they're terrible their mother treated them when they were 12, or how bad their father was at their wedding reception. And I think there is some sort of societal reaction to that. There's also an interesting thing called the perceived empathy gap, which is talks about why people are struggling to make friends. You can look that up. I don't know if I'm going to do an episode on that or not. But there is this thing where we generally believe that people don't really necessarily care about what's going on in our lives. In part because we see people kind of word vomit onto us. And so we don't care about their word vomit. And so we can sometimes translate that out. And it's not always accurate. But the toxic person, they only want you to see what you see, what they want you to see. And they're very controlled about this. They'll be willing to lie and manipulate for that. And you'll see this with them. Now look, there are again places where it's appropriate. Probably you don't need to go to work and just be your total self. There needs to be some level of growth there where you use wisdom in what you share and what you don't share at work. But we're talking in intimate relationships here. They're very controlling on what the other person gets to experience and see, to the point where they're willing to lie and they want to control you too. which can be a problem. So they like to play the victim. They like to be very controlled. And of course, by that, I don't mean that they want you to control them, but they want to control their world. It's just an unhealthy obsession to try to control your world. No one can control the world. The world is not controllable. You can control yourself and your own actions, but we all have warts. We all have, scars. We all have these things. And if we're going to have intimacy in a relationship, that has to happen. And this can happen in two ways, right? Toxic people can be too emotional and they can be too controlled by their emotions. They can, we call this emoting. And I'll see this a lot in divorce situations where somebody was caught in an affair. And a lot of times when that's going on in that affair, or when the affair is over and they're caught and they're going through a divorce, they will emote and they'll send out what we used to call mixed signals. What we would call now what clinically would be defined as contradictory signals. When I was a kid, we would call them mixed signals, right? And because whatever they feel in the moment, they express. That's emoting. That is, I have this emotional feeling, so I'm going to tell you. And then maybe later I have this different emotional feeling and I tell you. And I don't weigh out that not everything I feel needs to be stated. The flip side of this can also be true. And this is where people, they don't deal with their emotions at all. They just totally ignore their emotions and they want you to ignore your emotions. And they dismiss your emotions. They will diminish your emotions. In my book, The Emotionally Secure Couple, I talk about the 3 Ds of destructive marriages, and it is deny, dismiss, diminish. And they deny your emotions, they diminish your emotions, and they dismiss them. And this creates toxicity as surely as if you were to take poison and put it into your system, you're going to get sick. Or like right now, this time of year, I don't know about you, but I always kind of I try to think through everywhere I go this time of year, what's the likelihood that I'm going to have to touch things that other people touch who haven't washed their hands, who are sick? And a lot of times this same type of infection will flood through our relationships because we either overindulge our emotions or we underindulge our emotions. Incidentally, I think the overindulgence of emotions is one of the reasons that we're manufacturing kids with anxiety at a rate that just has never been seen in the world before. We're overindulging emotions, and then they're not being taught to decipher their emotions, and that can lead to toxicity. One of the ways that you will see this control work its way out in a relationship is they'll often have a script in their head that they want you to follow. And if you don't follow it, they will express great anger. And they'll scream at you, they'll yell at you, maybe they'll call you names, maybe they won't talk to you, maybe they'll just check out of the relationship. But there's a script in their head that they want you to follow, things that you should say, things that you shouldn't say. And they'll often present them in a very passive-aggressive way. They'll often present them in a manner that is just, you're like, what is going on? And it could be over something as stupid as sports, right? Like, we live here. I live here in Michigan, and I am not a Lions fan. I'm not really a fan of the NFL, but I'm definitely not a Lions fan. And most of my Lions fan friends wholly believe that the NFL is scripted and wants the Lions to not make the playoffs this year, which is funny because I have a lot of Cowboys fans as friends too. And when the Lions played the Cowboys, the Lions beat the Cowboys. And a lot of my Cowboys friends were talking the same thing. Well, it's scripted. The NFL wants the Lions in the playoffs, but not the Cowboys. And, that does not make any of my friends by it in and of itself toxic. But if they got mad because I didn't agree with them, or if I agreed with them, but not at the level of vociferousness that they wanted me to agree with them, that can be toxicity. And that can create distress in the relationship because when they run through things, they have this idea of what you should be saying and what they should be saying and how they're going to look. Because remember, this is all about control. This is all about appearance. This is all about what other people see or think or what they see or think. It's about the story running in their head about who they are and about who you are. And you're not, often for the toxic person, you're not a person to be loved. You're a character in their story and they're the main story. And so they have a script in their head that you need to follow. And if you don't, they're going to get mad. Now, I want to be clear here. This is not the same as them saying, hey, when you use this words, there's some pain there for me. For instance, I was working with a couple one time. They had an argument. The husband realized that he was wrong, said to the wife, you know what, you're right, and said her name. I'll call her Meredith, not her real name. She was still mad and hurt, and because what happened was her dad would say, you're right, to Meredith's mom, but not because he agreed with her, but because he was dismissing her. And Meredith's big fear was that she would relive her mom and dad's marriage. And so he stopped, like I said to him, I said, well, stop saying that thing, like go a different direction. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about somebody getting mad and berating you because you don't use the exact words the way that you wanted to. There's a difference between, hey, can you talk to me this way? And why didn't you say it that way? Why did you do it this way? And those types of explosions. And you'll see this with a lot of people. The truth is we're normalizing this a little bit around politics and polity. If you hold a different political belief than me, it is totally okay for me to yell in society. I'm not actually supporting this. I want to be clear about that. But in society, it's totally okay for me to yell at you, for me to diminish you, for me to mock you, for me to call you names, because you're clearly wrong and I'm morally superior. And a toxic person typically believes that here's the thing, they typically believe that their beliefs are just better than everybody else's. Often when you're dealing with a narcissist, which is another word that just gets thrown around all the time, a little too much, a narcissist really does believe that they really are that special. Like they're not putting that on for you. Now there's a war inside of them, and we could really dig a whole session out of that. But that's the same thing with a toxic person. They just don't understand why you wouldn't believe the way that they want you to believe. So they really want you to follow that script, right? They very much play the victim. They want everything to be controlled. Out of that control, they run this script. They either typically overindulge emotions or totally ignore them. And one of the other things that they do quite frequently is they take no ownership of their own behaviors. They take very little ownership. In fact, I wouldn't even say that. Most of the time they take no ownership of their behaviors. I can't tell you how often I have sat with adult parents of adult children, and the adult parent has said, I'm just sorry that our relationship is the way that it is. And of course, I'm a therapist, so I'll say, okay, well, awesome. What do you think you should change to improve your relationship with your son or with your daughter? And the answer is completely, like 100%, everything the son or daughter has to do different. It's not about their own behaviors. There's no ownership for them. They're not interested in owning their behaviors and going through the change, right? And I've said this before. I don't know if I've said it on the podcast. I think I have. You have to want change. That's a good step towards getting change. But you also have to be willing to pay the pain of change. And a lot of people get stuck on that. A lot of people aren't willing to do that. But especially the toxic person, they are just not interested in paying the pain of change because their behaviors are right? And anything that they did wrong was because you did something wrong first. And wouldn't anybody do that? I was talking to a client one time who was legitimately wronged by his ex. And he was bragging about how he was just rolling through his behaviors that he was doing that were just wrong. And he's like, well, just like, don't you think anybody would do that? Yeah, maybe, but here's the thing. I want to live to a standard of behavior. A toxic person will take no ownership of their behaviors, and they will point to other people's bad behaviors when they do talk about their own behaviors. I don't want to live that way because that's not healthy. The toxic person, they would rather die than say they're sorry, right? Get a little sip of coffee in there. They would rather die than say to you, oh man, I'm sorry. Now, if the toxic person was sitting in this room with me right now, they would be like, that is not true. I say I'm sorry. But their sorries often come with buts. Their sorries often come with, but I'm sorry that you, or they're about you. I'm sorry that you took it that way. In other words, if you had took it the way that I meant it, then duh. Now there is a nuance here, right? There are times where you say, hey, you know what? I didn't mean to say it that way. I'm really sorry. I didn't even think about that as an interpretation. I apologize. And then you ask a really important question. How could I have said that so that you would not have interpreted it that way? Is there a way that I could have said it, that I could have been more clear, right? That's the difference between a toxic person and a non-toxic person. The non-toxic person wants to know How could I have done it so that I could have been more clear? How could I better control what I control, which is my own behaviors and my own actions? Because the toxic person, they would rather die a slow, painful death, like being fed through a wood chipper, alive, feet first. They would rather die that way than say to you, I'm sorry, full stop. Because remember, they're the victim. Anything that's broken in their relationships is because the other person wronged them. That's like the flagship red flag about toxic people, that if you see that, you know, I need to proceed with caution. And that gets a little bit sketchy when it's someone, in your family, a brother, a sister, a mother, a father, a daughter, a son. How do you navigate that? Which we're not going to have time to get into too much today, if at all. I don't think at all. But that is the giant red flag. That is the red flag that screams toxicity. They are the victim in everything. There's no ownership. If you were to ask them point blank, okay, so you know what? I think what that person did to you was wrong. Like, just agree with them. What do you think you could have done differently in that situation? You're going to get a lot of, I don't know, never been in a relationship with them. Could have drawn, because I want to talk about two things here at the end. Boundaries and gaslighting, we misdefine them. And we misdefine them because we often think boundaries are for other people. So I'll have people tell me, well, I told them they're not allowed to talk about fill in the blank because that's my boundary. No. They can actually talk about that. They just can't expect that you talk about it with them because boundaries are for you. In other words, they're free to do whatever they want. You don't have to participate. A few years ago, a friend of mine said that his brother, who's a pastor, couldn't be a pastor because he was talking openly about who he supported in an election. And I chewed on it, 3, 4, 5 days. And I sent him a polo or a snap, I don't remember. I sent him a video. And he said, hey, here's something I've been thinking about. I actually don't agree with you that your brother can't be a pastor. I just don't think he can be your pastor because you get to choose that. But he gets to talk about whatever he wants. Boundaries are for other people. They're not, whoa, I said that wrong. Whoa, freeze, full stop, go back. Boundaries are for yourself, not other people. Boundaries are not so that you can tell other people what they can and cannot do, because toxic people want to control other people. Boundaries are, you can do whatever you want. I'm going to choose what I participate in. So I drive slow this time of year, especially snow-covered roads, dark, lots of deer running. People ride my backside, the back bumper of my truck. I welcome that because you're not going to control me and push me to move faster. I'm not driving illegally. There are speeds that you have to maintain. I'm just not driving fast enough for you. That's okay. You can pass me if you want. Now you're like, that's a silly illustration. It's really not, because it's the same. The process is the same. If your relatives want to talk about Trump and Kamala and ICE and Venezuela this Christmas, they can. They can't make you or expect you to participate. Which brings me to gaslighting. This is a term, this word has grown. Like, it's crazy to me. If somebody says, hey, that's a blue mug. No, it isn't. That's gaslighting. For those of you that are just listening and not watching on my YouTube page, I just held up my blue coffee mug, which is a blue Michigan football mug that my daughter and I got at a game a couple of years ago. That's gaslighting. Gaslighting is defined as denying something that is easily observable. So if you say that Japanese Wagyu beef is objectively better than American Wagyu beef, and if somebody says, I'm not sure I agree with that, they are not gaslighting you. If you tell somebody you did that because, and you list their motives, and they say, no, I didn't, or those weren't my motives, they're not gaslighting you, they're disagreeing with you. There is a difference between disagreement and gaslighting. In fact, I think one of the reasons we see this uptick in toxic relationships is because we have overindulged emotions to the point where people don't know how to properly handle them anymore. And then we have made gaslighting this giant term that any disagreement is somebody gaslighting me. Oh, he's gaslighting me. Whoa, wait a second. Is he gaslighting you or does he have a different opinion? Oh, she's just, you know what? She just gaslights me. Okay, well, wait, hold on. Are we talking about something that's an opinion or something that was factual? And that's also part of the problem. We confuse our opinion with facts. We confuse what we feel with facts. There are people that are like, oh, I love winter. I hate it. Don't gaslight me. I'm not gaslighting you. The truth is I don't hate winter. So I guess I would be gaslighting you. But I don't like it for long. I enjoy, there's this weird sense of calm that I find in winter with the deep snow, the cold, it's quieter, right? Cold air is quieter, suppresses sound. I like that for a little while. And so one of the things that happens is we have this terrible, awful definition of boundaries. And then anybody who disagrees with us is gaslighting us. And that just isn't a sustainable life path. I hear this the most with my clients when they talk about their workplace. Well, my boss didn't give me a raise. He was gaslighting me. He said he doesn't think I'm worth whatever the raise was that I asked for. What are you talking about? That's not gaslighting. Unless there was like really easily measurable criteria that you met, that you can prove you met, and he's saying you didn't. He's not gaslighting you. You're giving him your opinion that you're worth X amount of dollars, and he's telling you that he doesn't think you are. That's literally how the free market works. I see gaslighting all the time when people talk about, well, disrespect. Well, I told my kids that they can't do this. And my wife asked me why. That's disrespecting me. Nope, that's disagreeing with you. And then they'll say to me, don't gaslight me. I'm not gaslighting you. I'm telling you that that word does not mean what you think it means. And so we run that out a lot. And here's the thing. I want you to be aware of these markers because A, you're probably in a relationship with someone. And B, here's the uncomfortable part. Some of these are probably in you. Some of these you probably do. And if you want total mental and emotional health and wellness, if you want to be more emotionally healthy, you have to find these and root these out because they do spread like poison. They do spread. I watch this with parents and their young children, and invariably when I see it then, if I talk to the people, I can find hints of it in their marriage before they had kids. So be cautious of that. All right, what are your questions about this? This is one of those things where I almost didn't do it because I was like, 25 minutes, 20 minutes, a half hour, that is not enough time to properly deal with. How do I know if I'm dealing with a toxic person or if I'm just dealing with somebody I don't like, which is not the same thing as toxic. All right, well, hopefully you find this valuable. If you do, would you do me a favor and would you share it with your friends? I cannot tell you how valuable that is to me. If you haven't already, hit subscribe in your favorite podcast store. You can go to IamJoeMartino.com and click on Emotionally Inclined. You can subscribe there. If you're interested in religious and spiritual things, you can go to hidingbehindgod.substack.com and subscribe there for all my thoughts on those things. Thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you next week.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share with a friend. And hey, give us that rating in your podcast store. Until next time, change possible.